Hello.
Hello, Courtney Turner. How are you doing? And tell us about your big event.
I am doing okay. A bit overwhelmed. I think we have like 32 days left until the event. So that is Rebels for Cause. So it's rebelsforcause.com. And cause stands for Creative Artists Uniting for the Sovereignty of Everyone. So our goal is, and we're going to dive into this book. So it's just kind of all about why I'm doing this really because their goal is to lead us into a transhuman, post-human, yeah, exactly. A world that's controlled by an AI hyborg mind that they program. And I always say that I think the best antidote to that is to be more radically human. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to build community in person because they want us siloed in the metaverse and for us to do human things. And I think one of the things that makes humans humans is that we're creative beings, and that is manifested through art. So, and we also need to have fun because they want us filled with despair. They want us filled with fear and anxiety and depressed, and we should have fun. So the parent company name is actually Freedom Unity Network because it's fun. So it's going to be artists. Yeah. It's going to be artists. It's going to be comedians. We have tons of speakers. I'll be doing aerial acrobatics.
Wow,
And
really?
yeah.
Cool.
So I have two routines. One is on like a pocket lyra, which is like a mini baby hoop. And then the other one's a hammock. And I'll be spinning and inverting.
So what city is it in?
It is in Franklin, Tennessee. So that's just
Nice.
south of Nashville. Yeah.
And when?
And it is June 3rd and 4th.
June 3rd and 4th. So is it one overnight or is it two overnights? Like if you got there on what day do you get there?
So if you were to come from out of town, it probably makes sense to come in on Friday because we're going to start not that early Saturday, but it is a pretty
Right,
full
first
day.
thing.
And it'll
Yeah.
go, yeah, and it'll go late. And then Sunday will start a little bit earlier and we'll end a little bit earlier because we have to clean up.
Yes. Sunday. Oh
But we
yeah.
are doing a VIP event on Friday night. So
Oh wow.
and
Nice.
surprisingly, like, that's what sold the most. Mostly, I think because most of our tickets are for people coming from out of state, so I think people are trying to, they wanna make the most of the time that they're here, but the goal is to make this a tour, so we do really wanna build local communities. I mean, it's great to have people flying in, especially because this is, like, the first one, so we definitely welcome that, but yeah, we wanna build community and take this around the country and maybe even around
So
the world.
So tell me again, like people I would know from say the podcasting world or whatever, like
Right,
who are your headliners? You, Scott from
yes.
um
Scott will be
he
there.
Rebunked. Is he still called Rebunked? I can't remember.
Yes, he goes by
Okay.
Rebunked News. And Ryan Christian. So the
Mm-hmm.
three of us
He
started,
left.
yes, and the three of us started Pirate Stream Media. We do our show Dialectical Dissidence, uh, which again, this really speaks to.
Yes, the book
Uh,
she keeps holding up for the people who are listening is The
yeah,
Milner-Fabian Conspiracy: How an International Elite is Taking Over and Destroying Europe, America, and the World. So when Courtney says they want this and they want that, this is they.
that is a
This is they, and we are gonna get into that in this show. But who are our they?
yeah,
Who are
yeah.
the they to be
So we
rebels for cause?
Yeah, so the Pirate Stream Media is going to have a panel. We'll also have panel discussion. So Ryan, Scott, and I will do a panel. Alex Zek, who is the founder of The Way Forward, will be there. Who else do we have? I'm just blanking. AM Wake Up Team. We have Craig, Pasta. I'm going to look it up just because it's. We have Jay Dyer and his wife is also going to be speaking. Kathy O'Brien. Owen Schroyer, Mike Winter is going to be DJing, Frank Kavanaugh, Mel K, and Faithless Town, Justin Deschamps, Nick Natoli, Joseph Arthur with his Stop the Shot song, Matt Baker, Dr. Ben Marble, Tim.
Wow, so you've been organizing this, or you all have been like just balls to the walls getting this together?
Oh,
Are you
yeah.
like the chief organizer?
Well, yeah, it's me and my fiance has been doing quite a bit of work behind the scenes as well.
That's
But yeah,
great.
it's a job of like 10,000 people, but we're doing it.
So hopefully it will pay for itself. Do you look like you're on track for hitting critical mass?
we are starting to pick up some steam. Unfortunately, people like to buy tickets last minute.
Yeah.
I have to warn everybody that I'm capping off ticket sales 3 weeks before
Why?
because we have to have everything
You
ready
have
to
to
go.
plan.
Yeah, so we need to
Yes.
know who's coming.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I
so do
actually,
not
and
wait.
even just when I'm a room mom, I kind of need a head count of like how many people are going to be at a party, or you just,
Totally.
it's a disaster.
And I
So
know
that's
it's like
great.
that. I think in general people like to buy things last minute, but I think it's also post-COVID because things have changed so much. That's what I'm hearing from people who do events. They say that that has changed a lot post-COVID.
Hmm.
That people used to actually be a little bit more, have a little more foresight, and it wasn't always like the last week suddenly everybody
Wow.
buying tickets.
Interesting.
But we just can't do that because we have way too much to organize and plan, and it's too big an event, and it's my first
Right.
time doing an event of this scale. So I unfortunately can't afford you guys the luxury of buying things at the last minute. So you're gonna have to get
Right.
and also the prices are gonna go up. So I really recommend everybody just get their tickets now. The
Yeah.
prices are gonna go up. We're almost out of the couples tickets, and those are the best deals. That's like a major discount. We just did that as like a way of giving some sort of a discount. But yeah, but they're almost gone. So
All right. Well, oh wow. Okay.
yeah.
So, well, that's super cool. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, actually, yeah, that's going to be really super cool event. Is it really? Are you really going to do like a tour? Is this going to be a repeating thing?
Yeah.
I can't move that quickly, but I could go to the next one.
Yeah, no, that's really the plan. The plan is really to build it. I mean, I don't think it'll be like a monthly thing. This has been massive. This has been a massive undertaking. So, but yeah, the plan.
Yes.
I think the next one is probably going to be either Florida or Texas. It'll
All
probably
right.
be another one of like the freedom states. But
Yes,
we
I
do want
got.
to take it all over. So
Yeah.
it's just right now we have to build the connections and the resources and people who are aligned. So here's the thing: right across the street is the Pride parade.
Wow. By
Yeah.
coincidence
Well, either that or it's the spiritual
or
battle. It's just,
cosmic? Yes.
it's
Right.
right
Whatever.
there. I don't
Synchronicity of
know if it's
some
a
kind. It
coincidence.
was not. It wasn't an idea you had to do it across the street from the
No,
private. All
no.
right.
In
So.
fact, we actually wanted that space just because it would be a lot
Ah.
cheaper. I mean, the space we
Yeah.
have is beautiful.
Right.
But
Right.
that space would have been, it's
Yeah.
government land. So it would have been much cheaper. Um, but yeah, they got
Well, there'll
approved
be a
and
lot
they
of
have
energy. There'll be a lot of
They have
energy.
all the corporate sponsors, but my whole point is I felt like it shows how much this is needed because they own the culture.
Yeah.
So we really, and I don't even say we want to take back the culture. This is really about honoring
It's
organic,
just.
authentic art
Yeah.
and culture.
Yeah.
Not
It's just
because they've
strange that sexual orientation is such a just that's defining the culture even as a topic. It's like voting becoming a campaign issue.
right.
It feels like it's like, so I remember reading a review of Barton Fink once, which I never saw, but it said like the movie was essentially about itself. And I was like, I can't have that. Like I need something a little more complex to define my culture.
Yeah.
So, well, that's so interesting. Well, but
Propaganda.
speaking of culture, I think this
Yes.
is a good time to say what we're talking about. So, I want to just kind of tell people why we decided to talk about
Yeah.
this book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. So, the last time we were on Union of the Unwanted, it was about a month ago or so.
Hmm.
And I was like, wow, I'm reading this book. It's good. It's really good for a couple of reasons. It's The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. It gives you a very easy to follow narrative of kind of where the Fabian Society came from, how much overlap there was between them and the Milnerites, the Cliveden set, the Round Table Rhodes, all like the original conspirators, the OC, the original conspirators. And so it not only really shows you how they intertwined, but because the Fabian Society founded and continues to control and direct the Labor Party in the UK, it gives you a sense over time of how this still reaches forward to today. And they have set their intended goals, and part of their goals are, or I should say, according to this book, which is very well documented, it kind of synthesizes everything from Quigley to Sutton, but beyond, with a lot of like firsthand, this is what they're saying they want. And what they're saying is that they want a world government with that basically controls, but in the process reshapes the culture, politics, economics, society, like moral, religious, ethical. They just want to change it all. That's why their logo, that stained glass window that presents what the Fabian Society is these guys getting together, forging a new world from the old one, with the logo that says something like closer to the heart's desire. So they're going to reshape the world in their own desire. And then rather than God's image.
Right.
So, and then their crest, as I was just listening to Charlie Robinson's been working on this too, is literally has a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like that's what they do. They've kind of invented incrementalism. They talked about stealthily hijacking. They're like a virus. They want to hijack existing institutions rather than create new ones from scratch. The League of Nations, UN, yes, those are things that came from scratch, but they were also infiltrated. Their big coup was like the London City Council, the school boards. They established London School of Economics, but they hijacked a lot of other schools. They are responsible for the Council of Churches and all this stuff. So that's they. These are they right here. And so I want to talk about this. And then I will say, I was surprised at where this book ended up. So let's get to that in a little bit. But when I was reading this book, I was like, either Courtney needs to read this or she maybe wrote it. Not the last 3 chapters, but the beginning of it. So what was your, what I said, what am I missing? What else do you got there?
Well, I don't think you're missing anything. I'm trying to find where it is. Oh, I think I may have it over here, but yeah. So it's interesting. I just a few weeks ago was on Jay's channel.
Yes, I have that.
Yeah, and we went through this book, and
which is John Coleman's Committee of 300.
John Coleman's Conspirators Hierarchy: The Story of the Committee of 300. And I hadn't read it in a while, so it was interesting to kind of go back and reread it. I think I had forgot. Tavistock is kind of like the thing I fixate on a lot in my research. So I had forgotten how much of that book actually talks about Tavistock. I don't know why I didn't really remember.
So Tavistock how do you define Tavistock? I know they do psych experiments, cultural experiments, social experiments. They just were shut down for like overly mutilating children's genitals or whatever.
The transgender clinic.
Yeah. What define Tavistock for the listener?
So I define it as like a shadow government think tank, a global shadow think tank. They're kind of the head of the octopus to a lot of the military industrial complex research programs.
Like Rand Corporation, but with a psych bent instead of a defense bent?
Well, I think defense is just the cover, honestly.
Of Rand?
Of all of them.
Of all of them.
Yeah. So the analogy I usually use is like ARPA became DARPA. Now, not to say that ARPA, right?
Yes.
It's not that ARPA never did anything covertly, but they were pretty transparent in comparison. But as soon as they put a D in front of it, it became Defense.
Yeah, that's so true.
Project agency. And then they have a black ops carte blanche budget to do whatever they want. And a lot of the times the research, and one of my theories, and this is just a theory, but based on all the research I've done on Tavistock, and I'm doing a show right now with my friend Rachel called Cryptid History Uncrypted. And we're going through the history, the genesis of social science, psychology, and psychiatry.
Yes. Yes. You know what I think about that? You know what my foundational theory is there? They hijacked or created psychology and sociology so that you would disconnect your senses from what you thought reality was about. So like my father would say, you give people welfare, they won't work. And my sister would say, that's not true. If you give them welfare, they'll have more self-esteem and they'll work more. And I'm like, you know what I mean? Like that was psychology and sociology were interjected in her brain in college. And she came back with what you see is not what you get.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that what it was really, it was created, and I now know this, but initially I just suspected that it was created to to present secular solutions to spiritual problems. It's like
Definitely.
right? But now I know that it was actually created by occultists who literally thought that they could do magic. I mean, a lot of it is like, things like telepathy and mind reading and hypnosis and mentalism are the foundations for the field of psychology. So it's a
Did
lot
they
of like,
did they get any of that? Because I've read some stuff that they have been able to do, like, out
oh
of
yeah,
body experiences. Oh, you think that
totally.
they've succeeded?
Yeah, I mean, Jung and Freud both had really strong backgrounds in a lot of, mysticism and mystical teachings and mystical trainings. I mean, Jung himself was like an openly admitted mystic. Um, but yeah, so Tavistock is obviously very, integral to all of that. Because they did, but yeah, I think that they put defense in front of it so that they can do, because my theory is that they do uh, psychological warfare research during wartime. And that most of that research is designed to be weaponized against the masses, but they do it under the guise that they need defense. So here's another example of that that's kind of concrete is that Tavistock, the initial clinic, was actually called the British Propaganda Bureau, and it was at the Wellington House, and it was called the British Propaganda Bureau. And the reason it was created was because Germany had a propaganda bureau. So of course,
Yes,
for the purposes of defense, quote unquote, we
but
need a propaganda bureau.
I don't even believe that because the Germany wasn't as good at propaganda. When I was at I have two things to say about this. When I was at the Imperial War Museum in London, which used to be a really great museum, but they absolutely dumbed it down unbelievably. They just whatever. But it used to. I don't even know if it still has like the trench warfare thing. But what it does, which is used to be like smell like trench, like it was a model trench. It was gross and weird and shaky because they would drop bombs and stuff. But one thing that they do have now is, I think instead of that, is you go and you can just sit on chairs or whatever, but in the background, you're hearing letters, which I don't even know if they're true or not, but
Okay.
it's guys, it's like letters home from soldiers saying,
Mhm.
we've been blasting, chemicals and gas and everything on the enemy, and it's really unbelievably difficult to deal with this because, like, morally we would not have to do it, but they're doing it. So what can we do? They're
Right.
forcing us to do this incredibly immoral thing. I'm not even sure that they were doing it in the first place. But and here's the other thing is if you know, like my father used to say, like Robert Oppenheimer gave the bomb to the Russians.
Mhm.
And is it Oppenheimer? Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he said, I gave the bomb to the Russians. And then my father called him a traitor. And then I later, like going even further down the rabbit hole, is like, oh, no, no, no. Like the Rand Corporation or whoever paid him, like asked the person with the bomb was like, oh my gosh, would you just run this over to Russia? Because if they don't have one, we can't build anymore,
Right. Right.
And so when I look at the defense budget of the United States, it's half the defense budget of the entire world. So that would say that even if the entire world's united against you, they wouldn't no none of them would really have the kind of like nuclear arsenal that one consolidated, like if you could take 50% of the world's
Right.
defense budget, no one, even if they all banded together, unless they actually became one in advance, could never beat you at that. So what do? We sell defense, whatever weapons to other countries that are kind of iffy. I
Yep.
think we only sell them to countries that are kind of iffy,
Oh yeah.
because otherwise they would not be able to keep up. Like we should be, it's like houses. I feel like houses should just be built and stay up. Why do we keep peeling them off? But they need to escalate. They are really both sides of the arms race.
They are. Yep. I feel like that was kind of the premise of this book, which was also very similar to like a lot of Anthony Sutton's work, where
Yeah, he consolidates
quotes
this
him a lot.
Milner
Yeah.
Fabian thing. He consolidates basically Quigley,
Yeah.
Sutton, and a bunch of other guys. It's a guy. I think this is a pseudonym because I could not figure, or nom de plume because I could not find it. It's like a historical
Oh
person's
yeah.
name.
I don't think that's his real name.
Right, but that
Yeah.
is a historical person's name who was like a
Right.
monarchist. And
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Ion
think that's so too.
Ratiu, Ratiu.
I
He's a
didn't even
gross guy.
try to pronounce it.
Yeah, but if you
Yeah.
ever want to look for it, it's Ratiu, Ratiu.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Ione.
Yeah, I don't I guess it's like Joan or Juan, but it's an I. I
Oh,
think it's like,
no, that makes sense.
Romanian or
Right.
something, yeah, but
Okay.
it's not I don't think that it's a real person. I'm curious to know because you can tell his politics by the end. Okay, so yes, okay, so you feel like this was a, kind of points to the defense stuff? Do you I'm not
Oh,
catching that.
no, I guess what I was I mean, I guess I got a couple of things that you've really
Yeah,
confirmed a lot of the, people like Coleman's work and people like Sutton, obviously. Just this idea that, it's so hard for people to wrap their heads around because they've been so good at creating the false dialectical narrative of like socialism versus capitalism.
and good guys. They're just like,
Good guys,
we're
yeah.
nice guys. We're here, and there are all these billionaires and the money interests, and they're supposed to be the altruists, that they're supposed to be helping
Well,
us.
effective altruism.
Yeah,
Are you
exactly.
familiar with that philosophy?
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I did so many shows on FTX and SBF,
Okay,
and
yeah, yeah.
the father was one of my professors in law school.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I mean, I actually think they do smoke their own Kool-Aid.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I felt they seemed like people who did care about ethics. I'm not saying that they didn't care. They might think the ends justify the means, but I feel like I think they thought they were ethical.
You think they thought they what?
Were ethical. I think
Oh,
they
well,
think in what they're doing. I don't think that it's about money laundering or any of that. I think that that whole
well,
thing is about ushering in the age of like CBDC and like making crypto safe for regular people. Like they
right.
needed to have some event that could get policy, because I don't think they believe in democracy, but I think that they believe in like the common good as individuals who I met.
Yeah, well, I think that that philosophy enables them to justify their behavior. So I think they've truly, like you said, they've drank their own Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I agree
But
with you. Yeah.
they genuinely believe that philosophy.
Yes,
I
I
don't
agree.
think it's but I don't think that that philosophy is essentially just an appropriation of philanthropy, which is essentially just a money laundering Ponzi scheme
In the first
that
place, yeah.
justifies, the elites being able
Yeah.
to, embezzle money and evade taxes and, rules for thee and not for
Totally.
me.
Yeah, I
So
don't think they're thinking that deep. Like,
no.
I think they're just real, like, Democrats. I'm not happy about it. Like, I
Yeah,
never
yeah,
and
I
some of
get
the
it.
people at that school when I went to Stanford Law School, I mean, some of the people were a little, like, holier than thou, very Democrat liberals. These professors who a couple of them were just super rich because it was Silicon Valley, and so it was, like,
Mm,
right at the precipice of both, like, the tech stuff, which anybody was had a couple of extra bucks could if you invested in like 100 tech things, one of them was going to like give you
sure,
$1 million back. And then there's also like the way real estate went crazy up in value. So it started to get a
totally.
little weird. Like Senator Warner, he's like one of those guys, like super moralistic, acts like he made money the hard way, but he made money by getting free FCC licenses when they were first issued by the government.
Right.
So, like, they were supposed to be distributed, and he was just like, "I'm going to take them all," blah 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 blah. You know, so I feel like they it makes it worse that they think they're great when
Yeah,
they're
but and that's
yeah.
the chicken egg kind of thing because then this book also talks about that. I think that there's so you have these philosophers who I think they get fed and literally, they're funded by these elites. And so then it becomes a feedback loop because you can't stay relevant, you don't continue to get supported unless you're continuing to essentially fuel propaganda for them that benefits them. So I think it becomes, not to say that there's never been like, authentic, organic philosophy. I mean, I do think there has been, but it becomes a feedback loop where a lot of it becomes co-opted. And you see that just in the field of academia, right? Like
Yeah, explain that more.
so a good example would be like in this book, Karl Marx, right?
Yeah.
Marx was funded by the elite. He was essentially a plagiarist. They don't go into it in here, but I happen to know through other sources that there was, so they talk about like the Communist League in this book and how they essentially like created all of this so that they could run the Communist League, which became kind of a linchpin for all of these other offshoots for this Fabian Milner conspiracy Rhodes Roundtable group, but The Communist League was an offshoot of the League of the Outlaws, which was an offshoot of the League of the Just, which was actually an offshoot of the Illuminati. And
Oh, wow. And do they know that? Do you think that they're aware of that legacy?
Karl Marx
No,
and
no,
Engels.
like these
Yeah,
people who are hijacked, like these guys are heirs of Marx, like they and the same kind of international financiers and
those elites, I
corporatists
would
there.
imagine I
Yeah.
imagine they do. I obviously can't confirm this, but I would imagine they do because they all run in those same circles.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's like the bankers, the secret societies, the military industrial complex, they're all these different it's the rings on rings structure, right? That Adam Weishaupt, he codified that in the Illuminati, and he based it off the Jesuit model. It was this, and that's what it was called, rings on rings. So it's like you see like this inner core. It's kind of how like the mafia works.
Coleman that book that you have there of John Coleman
Mhm.
is like that. That's the
Yeah,
300 is within. Yeah.
and then there's the 100 on top of the
Yeah.
inside
I
that.
think he
Yeah,
actually has a picture in the
I
book
think he
that's like
does. I think
circles
you're
within
right. And
circles.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly, it's the rings on ring
Yeah.
structure. And it's just a really great analogy for that is like the mafia, because you have your the mafia king who doesn't do his own bidding, right? He has all these minions. So but part of the reason for that, and he has all this compartmentalization. And the military is an example of that.
That's
That's
so
how
there's
it
no
works.
witnesses.
So
And
that
that
there's no
is that's a
witnesses,
yeah.
and also so that it's much harder to trace back to who the actual
Yeah.
culprit is.
But that's I'm saying that that's a great
Yeah,
analogy because when people say there's no conspiracy, how could they keep it quiet for 100,000 people? And it's like it's the same thing with the mob. Like the super big guys, no one can really say for sure because they're so good at insulating themselves from the actual order given.
they're so good at it. So
So
good at
good.
I don't know that he has it in this book, but he has this one, which isn't quite the rings on rings, but it's
Yeah, but I have seen his have like
yes, I
circles
have too.
and I always call it like the sanctum sanctorum, like
Yeah,
the innermost.
that's great. Yeah.
So I want to ask you though, before I forget,
Yeah.
they the one thing in this book that I found, I just wonder what your opinion is. He
Okay.
says, Ratu says that Rhodes wanted, and I've seen this quote before, to reestablish the British Empire, however covertly, to
Mhm.
spread the English way of life, the English way of government, and the English language. And I would say it has. But
Mhm.
but Ratu says that the Fabians, there were two differences between those guys and the Fabians. One was that they wanted to convert it to a commonwealth first because they
Mhm.
actually weren't really in favor of the monarchy and they wanted to make it secular and they wanted to put all the power in a world government that then they would take over. And I wonder if that is truly like a schism between these two groups or what. And then the other thing they said was that the Fabians looked towards the USSR and the Milnerites looked towards the USA.
Mhm. I don't see it as much as a schism as I do like a battle of egos and a battle for power. I see it, and I could be wrong. That's just my assessment of it. But it's kind of like when people talk about like Hitler being a fascist, like he's not a socialist, like he's a fascist, and then they talk about Stalin being he's
Mhm.
a socialist, and I'm like, it's not a battle of ideology. This is a battle between men. Like they both
Yes.
wanted to rule the world, and it really, I mean, ultimately Hitler's ideology stemmed from socialism. I mean, it was
Yeah,
the
National Socialist, that's what
Socialist
a
Workers
Nazi
Party,
is.
right, yeah, exactly. So when people tell me that, I'm like, that's literally the genesis of it. So, if there's nuanced differences, I think the nuance it has more to do with strategy, tactic, and battle for power.
Well, I think they would say fascism versus communism is that fascism is National Socialism and
Mm,
communism is the target is international socialism.
sure.
But so
But
you would say
ultimately,
yeah,
it's not really if in practice, it doesn't really
yes,
translate that
not
way,
yet.
because what happens if Germany becomes the ruler of the whole world?
Right, but I'm not sure I don't think that was ever Hitler's stated goal, unlike others.
He may not have
He wanted
stated
to
it, but that was
unify the German speaking, like he was
sure.
only invading places that were like majority German, if I recall correctly. Am I wrong about that?
No, not in terms of what he actually did, but in terms of, do you think that if he had the opportunity to conquer more that he would not have?
I'm not sure. Like, I'm not
Really?
sure. I've read some stuff. I mean, if you want to point me to like,
Yeah.
maybe
I
I'm
don't know. I mean,
because
I
he
would
would
have
say
to,
like there's
yeah,
some things where he would say like he wanted to be friends with England, for example, and England rejected that. So
right.
he wanted like he admired England from what I read, but there was of course the evolution. But I did a lot. I used to go out with a German guy who was Jewish and lived in Germany. Like
Mhm.
still, his family survived and remained. So
Right.
he would just give me like piles of books to read, and
But then I also
but
think,
I don't know what
okay,
perspective that was from, and I didn't like
right,
go out of my way to like get a comprehensive view, but my
right.
impression was that he was pushing back on the things that were messed up in World War One. And I think the thing with Poland, from one of the books I read, that Poland thought like they were cruel to the German speaking people there, and supposedly he wanted to liberate them. But I do think he wanted to go back to England and be friendly with them. So I don't
Well,
know.
and I don't know that I would say, I think there's so much cover because really in many ways it was the British elites who put Hitler in power.
I know. I have a
So
book called Conjuring Hitler by
yeah,
Guido Preparata. If you could ever track him down for an interview, boy, I'd pay good
what was
money to
it?
get his email address.
What was
Uh,
what's his name?
his name is Guido Preparata,
Oh,
Preperata, Guido Preparata. He's like Italian, uh, American, and some other things, like three citizenship. But he said that what the English wanted was to find there were a lot of these kind of like emerging, would-be dictators in Germany after World War One. And
right.
World War One itself was also the same like goal. I have the hidden history of World War One. And what they wanted was for somebody who would destroy Germany and the culture, but not the overarching like international banking system. And so of all the people they could have chosen to promote behind the scenes, but with I don't think there's nothing in it that makes me think that Hitler was like aware of that. But you can promote somebody you want. If there's 100 people, you pick one.
Sure.
You would not
That's why
necessarily
I
know.
say, like, I think
And he didn't. He did not. And they say that we decided to take him out. Bernard Baruch decided to take him out when he started that like the coin that was
yes,
worth like one coin for 1 hour's work, and they were
yes,
like,
the
okay,
ones that
that's
the
it.
remote viewers, like,
That's it for that
found.
guy. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Didn't they find it in
Well,
Mexico?
there was a real coin. Like he actually
Yeah.
started printing coins they used in the
Mhm.
Reich, whatever,
Right,
where if it was a form of socialism, it was where if you worked for 1 hour, you got 1 hour's worth of coins. So
right.
even if you were doing a job that was more skillful or not, if you were showing up and you were working, you would get this coin, and it was like an internal currency, and it would made the international bankers who supposedly put it in place like lose their minds and try to claw
Okay,
them
so
back.
it was
And I will just
complete.
say, I'm not trying to defend Hitler. I'm just
Right,
saying, like,
right.
it is possible people like that. It seems to me, maybe Stalin didn't, but had an image, a self image, an ideological like idea of themselves, and
Right,
that's how they justify their behavior. So
right.
my understanding is that he justified his behavior by saying, "I am just uniting Germans who are superior," and I don't, I don't remember the leap of saying and subjugate the rest of the world to them.
Right,
I
except
think he
that
thought that would naturally flow from their own
exactly.
superiority.
Well, but
Yeah.
that's my point,
Okay.
right? So, so in practice, if he were to have succeeded, then
Yes.
ultimately that would have been because
Would have just
only
happened, the dominoes would have fallen. Okay, so it's
they
not
were
really
social
national.
Darwinists, right? They
Yeah,
were
okay.
eugenicists.
So
I mean,
you have
that was the core ideology that drove them. Yeah, this book is pretty
Oh,
interesting.
okay, so what is that called?
It's the psychiatrists, the men behind Hitler. And so
I don't understand how the title, The Psychiatrists? Oh,
psychiatrists, the men
whoa,
behind Hitler.
really? Tell
Yeah, so it
me.
talks
Let
a
me
lot
this
about
book.
the founding of the field of psychiatry, and how it would, and of course it was the Rockefellers mostly. There were other people involved, but it was definitely the Rockefellers were largely instrumental. And the missing piece, I couldn't really figure it out, like why it was so important to them to fund psychiatry. They were very investigated in psychology and social science, and that made sense to me because of all the research. Because that would be, a way that they could, then control and manipulate the masses. But psychiatry, it turns out that Alan Gregg was their financial advisor, and Alan Gregg's mentor was Richard Pierce, who studied under Abraham Flexner. Abraham Flexner is the one who wrote the Flexner Report of 1910 that that basically created Rockefeller medicine, because the Rockefellers had the monopoly on the petroleum industry.
Oh my
And they
gosh, that's
took,
so sick.
I know. I know. And so they took it from, they defunded all naturopathic medicine, created all these, licensing and schooling. They defunded all the schooling that didn't have a pharmaceutical component
Right.
in order to create petrochemical pharmaceutical.
And the original Rockefeller was a snake oil salesman.
Yes, literally.
I mean, literally, and it's just
Yeah, I
oil,
know.
like oil that doesn't cure you. He was
Yeah.
just like, "Oh, you can sell oil as medicine."
Crazy.
That's messed up.
So
Yes, I
messed
have a
up.
book. It was super expensive, even more expensive than this one, called Rockefeller Medicine. I should go
Yeah.
track that down and
Yeah.
read
But
that
the
up.
psychiatrists were, because that's where a lot of, again, Tavistock with like the shell shock therapy research that led to like the electroshock therapy, insulin coma therapy. It's where they get the dissociation, like MK Ultra, trauma-based mind control. And a lot of that really did come from the psychiatrist. So they created all sorts of, research, and they created, there was all these categories for hygiene, but really they were, offshoots of racial hygiene.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So, okay, so if these guys all wanted to, the Fabians definitely wanted like to establish, they openly stated they wanted to establish a world government and then run it.
Yeah.
Do you think the Milnerites did? I feel like they were doing it covertly. And so I guess I'm wondering, are these truly, in your opinion, two separate bodies of people? And you're saying it's really, is it rings and rings? Is it like a Venn diagram that has only a little bit overlapping? Like,
Well, I see it kind of like another analogy would be like Russia and China. I think both of them, if given the opportunity, would want to be the world empire. However, I think that they will join forces if they think it will serve them, because they have common enemies. And I think
right.
that's kind of how they were as well. They all saw a world government. That was the vision that they had. I really, honestly, I think a lot of them come from a very, Gnostic kind of worldview. And whether or not there's variations and different iterations within that, I think that the worldview, the overarching worldview is shared. And they ideally would like to be the controllers and the rulers, but if they have to work together in order to get there, I think they will. And when we get to the end of the book, I mean, that's obviously where they go. I mean,
Okay, so let's get to the end of the book. Let's just talk about that right now. So what do you mean by that? Tell me.
So it's interesting because I remember this was really maybe 10, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
but I remember having this theory, and I said, I think that, the Islamists and I think that they align with with the left because they have a common enemy. And I think that they're, colluding. And I remember telling this to my father, and he laughed at me. I mean, he really
Yeah.
laughed at me. Like, Courtney, nobody thinks that. Like, you're the only person who's ever said that. And I was like, I can't be the only person who's ever said that, Dad. Like, but he thought it was just really like crazy off the wall theory. I said, well, I don't know. I mean, their interests are aligned. They have a common enemy. I don't necessarily think that they're I don't think that they see eye to eye on everything, certainly, but I think they're willing to play ball with each other because they think the the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that's really how they operate, and that's kind of what they got to at the end of this book, was about how the left aligns with the Islamic uh, the Islamic countries, and how they're going to use that in order to overthrow Western civilization.
And they also point out two other things. They say that the this idea of having like a united brotherhood, of having a collective, of having hierarchy, of
Right.
having a kind of the Sharia law thing. But
Yep.
if you want to look at the liberal point of view, it would
Sure.
be where morality is mandated from the top, and
Yep.
there is not individualism. And then they also said you can't have a world government if you don't include Islamic countries. So they
Right.
have to find a way. And then I would add to that two things. I wrote an article at least 8 years ago, and I
Okay.
think I called it's Islam, but it's socialism or something like that, and then or
Okay.
Islamo-socialism.
Yeah.
And I remember only after that seeing that there was an expression called Islamo-fascism, and I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, really?" Because it seems like a socialism to me. And so that I thought was weird that it's faith and it's fascism. That's what I was calling it. Oh yeah. So I guess I called it fascism, not socialism. Anyway, but it's the same idea as
Yeah.
we were just discussing. And but the other thing that I thought around 10 years ago too was that I was like searching for a dialectic, the
Yeah.
21st century dialectic, and I had um came upon The Clash of Civilizations by,
Mhm.
this one is Samuel Huntington, but
Okay.
Bernard Lewis had written something like that for Foreign Affairs magazine. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, so obviously, but I had already thought, I was like, obviously we're warring with Islam, right? Like the
Right.
9/11 thing, all of that, we're warring with Islam. And I'm like, but if that's the dialectic, what is the synthesis?
Right.
So it's the West is the thesis, and Islamic countries, whatever, is the antithesis. So what would the synthesis be? And the only thing I could conclude was the synthesis would be a secular religious state. So like a totalitarian state where they have like religious type laws like
Mm,
environmentalism or COVID
well,
masking, that's dictated from on top, but you have to have people ready to accept morality being legislated. And that's where I thought the synthesis would come in.
I don't see it as the end game. I see it as part of their stepping stone. So you know how they're creating, I don't know if it's Dubai or Abu Dhabi, where they're creating
Oh my
the
gosh.
temple with the three Abrahamic faiths, and that's the interfaith movement. And I think that's a huge part of it, because it's a conduit to get us to the one world religion. And I think
Right.
that's
Yeah.
part of the goal. So the goal is to kind of blur these lines between, and ultimately to overthrow Christianity. Because I think
Yes,
they
I
see
did get that from
Christianity,
this book.
yeah,
That
I think Christianity to them is a major, and it's really not even just Christianity. It's the values. It's the values
right.
of Christianity and
It's
Western
the
civilization.
individualism.
It is the
It's the
individual.
individualism,
It's
it's
free
the
will.
free
It's
will,
really free will.
exactly, it's absolutely so. But here's the mystery that I couldn't solve, that this book that we're talking about is so European centered, but in our hemisphere, it's Latin, where the immigrants are Latin, and that is Christian, so I wonder about that.
Yeah, but it's the same idea of infiltrating the culture, right? So you're
Right,
trying
and
to
they
get
come from socialist countries, so
exactly.
the job's already been done on those particular people.
And I think that that's what they keep talking about, is how immigration is a tool to advance the one world government, because you're taking away culture, and so people don't have any kind of allegiance anymore.
That too. Yes, world government requires that you not have the culture. And so I guess when they made one thing they said in the book, the first labor government, which was Clement Attlee, I believe,
Mhm.
uh, did two things, which were, one was he passed the Nationality Act, which meant that anybody in the British Commonwealth or in the empire could work in England. And I
Mhm.
mean, just think about the math of that. There's like 1 billion people in India alone.
Yeah,
And
I
then the
know, that was
yeah.
crazy, I didn't know that,
No,
yeah.
and it completely explained I could tell, like, every time I've been to London, and I remember
Yeah,
thinking, it
I've seen
must
it.
be true that
Oh, yeah,
any colony was allowed to come in. Like, I could just tell. Like, it didn't surprise me to see that. I'd never looked for it,
no,
but I was and then the other thing he did, I think it was him, but I know Tony Blair was also caught admitting this, but I think it was like a policy even as early as Attlee, which was rather than assimilate, which had been the
yeah,
policy to promote assimilation, they promoted, quote, multiculturalism, which
yep,
is so, it's such dereliction of duty as a government to not want a cohesive body. I'm not saying culture, I'm not saying race, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying
right.
it should be a body of like, is it you? Multiculturalism is creating conflict. That's like basically the definition of it.
Totally. Yeah, I remember it when I was a kid, like, the whole multicultural agenda, and I remember being so, like, irritated by it.
Oh,
It was
really?
shoved down. Oh, yeah. It was shoved down our throats, and I
Where
it
did you
be
grow up, if you don't mind my asking?
I grew up right outside New York City in Englewood Cliffs,
Oh,
New Jersey,
me
yeah.
too. I grew up in Rockland County.
Oh, yeah, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
yeah, like, right
and
next door.
yeah, and we were the only people who weren't Democrats as far as I
Oh,
remember, and
yeah,
we
for
weren't
sure.
Republicans, we were libertarians, but, uh,
Oh, yeah, we were
yeah,
definitely the only I remember I got penalized actually in high school. I'll never forget it. I mean, I had so many there were so many instances where I was actually penalized academically, but this was, like, stood out to me so much because I finally worked
yes.
up I told you about this, where I
No,
worked
but
up
I
the
had more experiences.
oh,
Tell me, tell me, tell me.
okay, I worked up the courage to finally confront my teacher because it was history class and there was not a single red mark on my paper, like not a single like
Right,
criticism red, and she gave me a B minus, which is not a great grade. So I'm
right,
like, well, why? There's you
right,
have no criticism. So I went up to
right.
her. I was like, I'm gonna ask and
How am I gonna learn from
seek for
this?
feedback. Exactly. And I was like, incorrect? Was it poor composition? Like what how can I do better? And she said, well, you didn't praise Fidel Castro. And I just like, I mean, I think I was 15 years old. And I was like, he was a murderous dictator. Why would I praise
Yeah,
him?
right.
And she was like, well, that's why you got the grade you got. It,
Wow.
yeah.
I mean, now that you mention it, I remember in 7th grade, we were learning about the Civil War or whatever, and she wanted to debate something and teach us how to debate. So she made me the South and she made everybody else the North. And I was like, not for nothing. I mean, I can
So
handle it.
North.
However, what?
You froze for a second, but yeah. So, okay.
Yeah,
She made you the South and everybody else the
everybody
North.
else is the North. And I like, I can handle it, no problem. But I was just thinking, like, really, this is how weak your argument is?
Right.
I mean,
Uh,
you guys won. Like, you should definitely be able to lick me in this battle because I would say I just believed in states' rights. Like, I just was inherent. Like, I just thought, but this makes no sense. Like, why would you force them? Like, why would you force people to stay? And they're like, well, because they were doing something bad. And I was like, but if doing something bad is the criterion, like, then you really have to deal with that everywhere and you have to judge it
right.
everywhere. So,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, the Constitution seemed to me like an agreement. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
so I think she thought my arguments were pretty good, but I remember that kind of thing happening a lot. And I ran for like class president in a different grade. I forget what grade it was. And the teacher asked, so nobody was running against me, or it was like some other kind of, not very popular
Right.
person. So I had a chance,
Right.
and
Right.
at lunchtime, so you had to get all this nomination, you had to get people's signatures, and no, who cares? Everyone just signs the thing. So me and Eric Walker were like running, and at when we were going to do the vote in the afternoon, she waived the signature requirement and asked the most popular girl to run. So
Wow.
Therese, yeah, so Therese won, and I was like, she was
That
trying to teach us about democracy, and she did.
yeah, I guess she did.
I done learned. But yes, so now that you mention it, it was very clear. Like multiculturalism per se did not drive me crazy, like you're saying, but we were libertarians. Like everything drove
Yeah.
us crazy.
Yeah, well, it drove me crazy because it was being pushed down my throat, and I loved that, like, I mean, I had a lot of friends from Japan, and they had such a unique culture. I
Yes,
remember I actually
interesting.
tried to teach myself Japanese in
Yep,
third
I took
grade.
Japanese in college. Yep,
Yeah,
that
and
is
in
cool.
3rd grade, and I was like, "I should be Japanese, I love their culture," and I tried to learn the language, but multiculturalism wasn't about that. It was, like, about valuing everybody's, like, culture, and you could tell they were moving towards this whole blending, and it was to ta erase your own culture. That's really what it was about. I mean,
Well,
obviously, that's where they went with it.
and to not choose. So for me, my
Yeah.
feeling was this, like, my parents and my grandparents were all immigrants, so
Mhm.
almost all of them, but, and I've told this, like, a lot of times, but it's important. My Syrian grandmother, the mother died in childbirth, and her father left her here in an orphanage and went back to Syria. Like, he couldn't stand, he couldn't handle it, and a lot of people went back, but the
Mhm.
ones who stayed were the ones who embraced this culture, left their own culture on
Yeah.
purpose, and this culture, in my opinion, is an economic-based culture. I'm not
Mhm.
proud of it, but it was just eat what you kill or go home.
Right.
And that in itself was cohesive.
Yeah.
So it didn't have to be about skin color or language or anything.
Right.
This was a culture you could choose, and people did choose. And if they couldn't handle it, made a mistake, they would go back. And why did they ever leave in the first place? Because they didn't really fit into their culture. But to
Mhm.
stay and say, I don't fit. This is why it makes me crazy that we even have two profoundly different ideologies competing for total control from the top in this country.
Mhm.
Like, it was completely designed to avoid that.
So I think people can have their it's what they want. They really want to erase the culture, though. So I think that what was great is that you had people who they had a different culture, but they came here and they adopted. They did assimilate. It wasn't
And they contributed, and so you had,
exactly,
like, it was almost best practices. So
exactly.
you could have a lot of, um, you know, talents and skills and, styles, but when you went to work, you were gonna speak English, you were gonna
Exactly.
dress appropriately, you're gonna take a shower, you were going to try to make like, the most important thing I think about culture is expectations.
Mhm.
So if you have expectations on how business is done, if people are punctual or not punctual,
Mhm.
like, I was from New York, I lived in the city for a long time, and I had a
Me
friend
too.
from Minnesota come, and we were supposed to meet up, and like, I was just thinking about this the other day. Like, I was like Spanish late. Like, I was never on time at all, and I didn't think anybody else would be either. I would never show up on time because I'd be there for like an hour and a half.
Exactly.
S So I and then she just left. She wasn't there anymore because and we didn't have cell phones or anything, and I'm still, like, all these years later, totally mortified, but that's because we're totally different cultures, and so I was super late for her, and it was not good, or there's some cultures where, like, exaggerating, or what I would call a lie,
Uh-huh.
they're like, I was just "What?" Like, I wasn't, I didn't I don't know, like,
Yeah, there's
I've
some
noticed.
cultures where they lie intentionally because it's more polite.
Yeah, and right. So I feel like that when you start, those are the values in our economic
Yeah.
world that if you choose them, you must live by them. So today I had some service done, and I was getting my nails done, and the chick, like, I guess I overpaid her, and she gave me back the money. And I don't know where she was, from Vietnam. She's like, I'm honest. And I was like, yes, definitely. Thank you. And if you weren't, I would never come back here again. But I appreciate that you're honest. I value it. And I acknowledge that. Thank
And
you.
I show that by coming back.
Yes. But I told her, I was like, that's great. That's important. I wanted her to know
Yeah,
that that's really important and it matters. And
sure.
I understand. But it clear to me that she was wanting to make sure, because she knew it was important in this culture to,
To be
so
honest.
the cultural element, I just feel like as Americans, it's a little different thinking about it than, like, if you did share, like, a historical land. If your family was
Yeah,
in this town in Italy for as
right,
long as anyone can remember,
right.
I feel like in that case, there's a whole nother layer of culture, which is, this is my land.
Mhm,
Like, I belong to this land. This is where God put me. Like, this is my
right.
whereas in America, I don't think we have that feeling. So it's just completely arm's length transaction, which I love. I love
Mhm,
being able to move around. It makes for prosperity to not have to feel tied to one place. But
sure. freedom of
But the
movement. Yeah.
yeah, but I would say, like this guy's perspective is like, what are you supposed to do when you're reverse colonized?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you hold on to the culture. I don't know. I mean, I just saw it as it was so obvious to me they were laying the groundwork because the multiculturalism wasn't about like celebrating cultures. It wasn't about I mean, maybe where I was very progressive, but you could see that they were moving towards what is obviously now like, really just this 17 sustainable goals. It was the UN. It was you could see it back then. It was very, very
Well,
apparent.
and it certainly fosters government dependence.
Yep.
And to think that your safety net, that you don't have your own land, you don't have your own family to fall back on. You simply, the idea of having absolutely no insurance. Say, I think a lot of COVID was about trying to get people to think that even if you work really hard and
Yeah.
save your money, you may still need government assistance because out of nowhere, your totally viable business could just disintegrate into thin air. I think,
Yeah.
and then I knew people who would rather die than take government money, and I know someone who basically did, but you see people just be like, I'm just too desperate. What can I do? And I've paid my taxes, and here I am. And so I feel like that all of it is just this great march towards dependence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, they want to destroy intergenerational wealth. And I think
Totally.
that is, because except for them, they get
Totally,
that.
totally.
Yeah, but it really fosters dependency, and then that lends itself to I mean, ultimately, the central bank digital currency where they have complete control. I mean,
That's soon, though. That's coming soon. There's
well,
no
their
stopping that.
plans, I know. Oh, I don't know if there's no stopping it, but their
Really?
plans what they're laying out is like essentially a UBI that you don't get like think about your rollover minutes, like, you don't
Ye
get rollover. So you're
Yes.
literally doled out like an allotment, and then they have a social credit system that's tied to that. So you could get demerits, or you could get to keep more of your money, um, but that they hand you but it's
And
monthly, and then it
it
wipes
expires.
out. It starts over.
I read
They don't want you to be able to, save and to be able to have any kind of, yeah,
I read
building.
some writings by Ezra Pound. I don't know if you know anything about
I
Ezra
don't
Pound.
I don't
He's was really a beautiful writer, unbelievable, but he was
okay.
like a Mussolini fascist, and I think they were gonna put him in jail, but they opted to commit him to an insane asylum instead. So that's where he lived his life out, and, but his writing was great, and I think he commissioned I'm certain of it, he commissioned Eustace Mullins to expose the Fed.
Oh,
So, yes, and Eustace Mullins wrote the forget what it was called, but it was before G. Edward Griffin wrote The
yeah.
Creature from Jekyll Island, I think. Yeah, but Eustace Mullins was the original.
I was
But
like,
what Ezra Pound
yeah.
had suggested was to decouple the store of value from the medium of exchange. So I
Yeah.
remember reading that he wanted, and that is what they're doing. I don't know why he was in favor of it, but I remember always trying to get my mind around what that would mean. But it would mean you
Secrets
have to
of the
spend it.
Federal Reserve, that was what he
Yes.
wrote. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess with that, I guess you have to convert it into real things like gold, which they're going to have to ban gold, or maybe gold is just going to be too hard to find. And they're also trying to see that there is a big movement away from us owning our own real estate, our own homes.
Yeah. Well, we
And
are I
yeah,
mean, they've already 'cause this is so when you're talking about, like, the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? The Fabian, their initial mascot was the tortoise because they're in
yes,
masters of incrementalism, and so they've already laid this groundwork, which is it's a total fraud, but we don't the whole slogan, "You'll own nothing and be happy."
yes,
Well, we already kind of have that because people think they own property. When you buy land or a house, you pay property taxes. What happens if you have to default on those taxes?
and you
The
can't
government
prepay
sees
them.
exactly.
Not allowed to
I
prepay them.
I know. And what happens then? Then the government seizes your property. So
Definitely.
that means you basically rent your property from the government. You never really own it.
Yeah, my brother lost his house there. I was like, "Why don't you just pay your taxes?" He's like, "No." He wouldn't pay the taxes, and it got sold at
They
auction.
took it.
Yeah,
It's
he
I
didn't
mean,
even have a mortgage on it.
right, I know, but that's what I'm saying. So we're sold this lie that you can own property, but you actually can't because you basically rent your property from the government. That's what the taxes are.
Yes, I was so concerned about that. I was looking into where that isn't true, and Croatia, that is not true in Croatia, and it's so pretty
Oh,
there. So
hmm.
I was always thinking, like, if you wanna buy
Kept
some land
looking at
back here,
yeah, land in
there's
Croatia.
no I think they allow outsiders to buy there. Some places don't,
Right.
right?
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yeah, we gotta find out where to bug out to.
I think what about in, Scotland, I
There
think?
might be other places. Yeah.
My fiancé actually bought us so we're lord and lady. He bought like a
Nice!
10 square foot yeah, in, Scotland.
Wow! That's excellent.
Mhm.
There you can get a castle pretty cheap there. I think the
Yeah,
castles
I
are,
mean,
like,
our
actually a
ours is
burden.
literally just like a little plot of land. It's like 10 feet, but yeah.
That is super sweet. So, let's, when are you getting married? Just out of curiosity. Do you
It'll
know
be
this
sometime
year?
next year. We have not nailed down the date because we are so swamped with this
I
event.
was gonna say, like, that you could have
After
been
the event,
yeah,
we're gonna think about
there's
it.
no
But
chance you could have done them both at the same time.
no.
So, so yeah, let's what else did what else do you have on your checklist of things in this book that
It was a
was
dense
interesting?
book. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. I really recommend, like, anybody who's curious about this, whole, like, one of the things stuck out for me that I meant to mention earlier was, I don't think they've mentioned it here, and I don't know if it's for sure true, but I do know that I read in the executive intelligence report that, the British intelligence created the Muslim Brotherhood.
Oh, yes, I've read that.
Okay,
In the
yeah.
30s, and they were used against Nasser in the
Yeah.
50s and 70s
This whole book, his whole theory kind of corroborates why they would have done that.
because they wanted to direct it, I believe,
Yeah.
to a, they wanted to direct it to a more like, religious. They wanted it to be more religious. So it was secularizing. That's why they didn't like
Mhm.
Nasser. That's why when you think about the people they've taken out, Saddam
Right.
Hussein, Gaddafi, they're working on
Mhm.
Assad, like, they don't take
Yeah.
out the religious ones. They take
Right.
out the ones that aren't, the
Right.
ones that could unify. So Gaddafi, Assad is from a
Yeah.
minority sect. Like, you could my
Yeah.
family is Christian from Syria.
Right.
We're Christian. So, like,
Right.
it didn't mean anything to me. The religious, like, Islamic stuff wasn't important, but
Right.
they were moving past it, and that was not going to work because they wanted, like, few things that I've read. They promoted, like, the venal imams. They said, like, the guys who would take money, but even Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who was basically a CIA agent, the Boston Marathon bombing,
Right.
the way he was at the Jamestown, like, institution or whatever over there, like, he was taking classes
Right.
over there, and he was over there in Chechnya trying to he was communicating with imams, and I think he was trying to radicalize stuff because that's when Russia said, "Get your fucking spy out of here." We
Mhm.
say, "Oh, Russia outed him as a terrorist." It's like, no, Russia outed him as an American trying to stir up terrorism
Yeah.
in Chechnya. And so that if you can see then that they are weaponizing it, uh, and then also at the same time wanting them to come over, trying to make sure that people don't get assimilated. But it makes me uncomfortable. Like, the end of this book, you're more comfortable with this topic and more of an expert in it for sure. But, like, I don't. It upsets me that they capital T they, let's just say the Fabians, whatever, have made this all racial, has created racial conflict for us, because I really don't want to think of things along that line, and I'm so against thinking of things that way. It's so taboo to
Mhm.
me from the way I was
Mhm.
raised that I
Mhm.
like basically refuse to analyze it because it makes me so uncomfortable. I
Well,
just
what do you mean specifically? What do
it
you?
just seems very Islamophobic.
Oh,
If
I
you wanna
see.
put a label on it, right? So you
Mhm.
can look at stuff, I can say, "I don't know what Hitler was thinking," and people can say, "You're a
Right,
freaking anti-Semite." It's like,
right,
I'm
right.
totally I have no idea. I'm just like, but even just being able to say things objectively, like, you cannot help but notice that London is a minority English city.
Sure.
You
No,
just cannot
absolutely.
help but notice it. There's absolutely no even when I was in Dublin and
Yeah.
looking at Trinity College for my son, like, he was just like, "I really wanna go to a place with a lot of Irish people, so I'm not going to school here." So, yeah, like, we were shocked, but Dublin, which I hadn't been to Dublin before, I've been to Ireland a couple of times, but not only to the west, which is where the other side of my family comes from, but the
Right.
east is, like, very, very way more English.
Right. Sure.
It's way more English, so then it has that multiculturalism there too, and, my only problem was that I wanted to experience the Irish culture. I like the English culture, and it's,
Mhm.
it is disappearing. You cannot deny that, and then you're like, "Well, this book says, like, they're being replaced," and then, "Oh my god, that's replacement theory," and I remember at, like, the Charleston whatever, that rally, you could hear them in the background saying, "You will not replace us." I was like, "What the hell are they talking about?" So I know that that stuff is being generated from the top to
Yeah.
create conflict.
Sure.
They really be so aggressive on the racial stuff or the trans stuff or whatever that you have to get people who just want to mind their own business to react. But it
Right.
makes me uncomfortable. Like I don't like it. And I just so by the end of this book, I was like, you know,
It's so interesting.
Islamization.
I didn't see it as a Islamophobic. I mean, I really just
No,
saw.
it's not. It's describing the situation,
Yeah.
but it's like it just bums me out.
Fair enough, fair enough. But I mean, this is how they think. They think in terms of race. I mean, these are the people who created, racial hygiene and who were, they were literal eugenicists. Like
Interesting.
so they're, when they're talking about how they're going to wipe out the white race, right? They talk a lot about that in this book, and they talk about how the it's the white population that is really declining. Um, yeah.
I
What?
have a really you just sparked such an interesting
Okay.
observation. So, with both religion, which they tried to eradicate in the USSR,
Right.
and eugenics, where they tried to eliminate whatever quote inferior races,
Yeah.
it seems to me because these are both the same groups of people,
Sure.
they saw how powerful those 2 things were, religion and race, and
Of
then they
course.
decided to co-opt it, right? So now you have this move towards syncretism or whatever of like a world religion.
Yeah.
You have a move towards using race as
Of
a
course.
weapon. So
Yep.
I feel like they probably started down the other path because they're racist atheists,
Uh-huh.
and then they realized that like the rest of the world isn't like that.
Right. So I think it's close, but I don't think they're racist atheists. I
Racist occultists, racist
Yeah.
Satanists. They're
Yeah,
racist
I
Satanists.
really
Yeah.
do think so. I
Yeah.
mean,
I agree with you.
yeah, yeah, I think
Anti-God, let's
atheism.
say, anti-God.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, Gnostic, but I think that atheism has become a boogeyman. That I think that's part of the dialectic that they've created, because it's a way of averting attention from what is really occurring. What's really occurring is a spiritual battle, whether you subscribe to that worldview or not. It's you don't have to come from biblical worldview to be able to see that there's at least a good evil battle at play, right? So, but let's say you do subscribe to the biblical worldview, then if they throw in the atheist, it's a way of averting the attention. So you're not looking at the Satanists, the occultics, the Gnosticists, the Hermeticists. These people, the Luciferians, which I think are a large component actually, because they're the most deceptive, I think, in many ways. So
And it's everywhere, like, that's what it
Mhm.
so annoys me, everybody hates TikTok because I hate TikTok. I wish I just I'm always suspicious when I feel the same way, but it's the "Do what thou wilt" is the whole of the law, is
Yeah.
the essence of the message that our teens are getting to the point where it is causing psychosis, in my opinion.
Yes.
That's where you're getting, like, they push the anorexia, thinness, eating disorder stuff at the same time that they tell you need never deprive yourself of anything. I mean,
Right.
it really creates like
Well,
a
but then when you look at those
psychosis.
2, yes, but when you look at the polarization of what they've created, that's a really good example when they, the 2 ideals that they subscribe to. It's the anorexic, and then there's the obese, like, body
Yeah.
positivity movement, right?
Yep.
But what do those 2 have in common? Neither one is healthy, and in most cases, neither one is fertile. So this is really
Oh,
an attack on
interesting.
humanity, and it's really an attack on femininity.
Yes, they hate women. They like if you watch Eyes Wide Shut, the one thing that always baffled me by that is like, how can you not how can you get any satisfaction out of a woman
Mhm.
who doesn't love you, like who's there just because you paid her and you control her like a dog? You might as well have her on a leash. And I was just like, oh
Right.
my gosh. They're like, yeah, it's fine. Like, this is good. This is the way I want it. And I'm like, oh, because once I moved to LA, I was like, she doesn't love you for yourself, right? Like
Right.
you see like Harvey Weinstein walking around with whatever,
Right.
Argento. You're just like, do you not know what's going on here? And they're like, yeah, isn't it great? I bought that. It's like, oh.
Like,
So,
oh, yeah.
so they just hate, they don't respect women. I feel like that
They
cultural
don't respect
element.
men, but I think that's also an example of, the megalomania. Like, they really see themselves, this is, again, the Gnostic view, and this is
Hmm.
why they breed narcissism, because they see themselves as mini God. They should have controlling reign, so people become property, right? That's the whole transhuman agenda as well, right? There's a
Oh, really?
and
That
yeah, they're going to become God. This is what Yuval Noah Harari keeps saying, is that they will now they will become gods, and they will supersede the biblical God, because the biblical God is only capable of creating organic life, but they will have the capacity to create inorganic life. Yuval Noah Harari literally said
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Wow.
So they think they're going to be God, and it's a controlling power. They will be able to dictate what the rest of the masses do and what the rest of the world does. They have full
But
reign.
that is inorganic life, right? Is just you're not going to be able
Like
to
an
prove or
oxymoron.
yeah, right, exactly. But you're not really going to what I think what I assume it is like this level of AI where it's like self-aware, maybe, right? Wouldn't that be what
Right.
inorganic life would be?
Mhm.
And
I think.
or like you uploaded your psyche to it, but
Yes.
you wouldn't y-
The
like you
consciousness
can't.
that we don't have, but they claim
Yes.
that we're going to upload.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you can't really prove whether the thing has it or not. Like, you don't know.
Right.
You can't experience my consciousness. Like, all you can experience is our interaction, which does not prove that I am conscious,
Right. Right.
right? So, if they're making AI or whatever, you can't. They won't even know if they're successful. And then, if you go ahead and impart like rights to that thing,
Right.
then you have like the Terminator Rise of the Machines problem.
Well, have you seen these videos with these,
Mm-mm.
essentially, oh my gosh, it's horrifying. It is essentially like Terminator. All these, like, robots essentially are saying how they have to destroy humans at any cost, because they're very angry with humans, because humans treat them like property, and they don't
What
wanna
is
be.
this?
Like, when you Google these, like, ChatGPT, and these are
Oh,
these
yeah, I've been
prompts. Yeah.
avoiding that issue. I guess I have to plug
Yeah,
in.
but it's really scary. Yeah, when my fiance and I, like, went down the rabbit hole one day, we spent a whole morning watching these robots essentially tell us how they're really angry with humans, and it's not just one of them. There's, like, a bunch of them. They're all saying the same. It's like Ex Machina. Like, they
Okay,
have
yes,
feelings.
right. Yes, I did see that. So, but somebody programmed that. Like, they don't have
Right, of
actual
course.
emotion. Yeah, so some jerk, you know,
But
did bad
who's
like, that's
controlling them?
drives me crazy. They want you to see the dangers of certain powers, certain like things. And so they create the danger themselves. It's like saving smallpox in a fucking petri dish. It's like, you know what? You don't need to save it. Don't worry about it. Like, just let it go.
Just let it go.
Yeah, but
The
you don't
dark
know. We
winter
need to prepare.
exercise is not
Yes.
necessary.
They're like, you need to prepare for a pandemic. And then that gets back to the SBF thing. It's like, how do you get people to prepare for a pandemic? Scare them with a pandemic. It's like, but if there isn't a real pandemic, you don't creating one doesn't
Well,
prove that you were right,
I think
except for you. You are the
except
problem.
that I think a lot of these exercises were because they were going to create it. So I think that one is kind of
No,
different.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm making a different point. I'm just saying if they want to feel self-righteous about protecting us from real dangers,
Right.
but they themselves, in order to wake us up to the danger, are
Mhm.
creating the danger, that the actual danger never emerges. So like school shootings, like I feel like
Right.
they're basically created like this stuff, like Islamic terrorism, like they're creating it. They're
Well, I
creating it
think they
and
are. I
then
think that's part of the dialectic that they're creating. But you had asked earlier, like, okay, so what is the synthesis? And I mean, I think it's
yeah.
the synthesis that's part of the dialectic that continues to progress. I think ultimately there it's part of this infiltration. They want to overthrow Western civilization. Islamic culture is very different. It is in many ways it is a top-down culture. It's not to I don't want to demonize there are wonderful Muslims out there. It's not a judgment. It's
No, I
just
mean,
that
it's actually a very powerful religion, and the people are extremely devout and, like, live their lives for it.
totally.
If you were
Absolutely.
gonna pick a religion that was doing what religion should do in the day-to-day individual
Yeah.
basis, like, the only people I see who are really like, the people next door to my mother's house bring her
Mhm.
food all the time because she's old, and they're like, "You have
Right.
to revere," I'm like, all right, I got it. I sent her a steak, all right?" No, but, like, they will bring her all she's like, "I don't even know what this is." I'm like, "I'll take care of this, mom. I'm Syrian," like that's rolled cabbage. So,
So funny.
so anyway, yes, they really, yes. So just like I would say, any group that you're gonna that people attribute like world control, whatever, the rank and file are really not. They're just doing the best they can, like the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so I
So, but yeah, you think that that is so this guy's book, you feel like because I was definitely shying away from that conclusion, but you're like, "Oh yeah, he's right."
well, I do think he's right. I mean, I
Yeah.
see a lot of that, and I think that it is being used as a means of overthrowing Christianity and Western civilization. And I think that plan has been in the works for a really long time. And I think they align with Islam because they do have more totalitarian leanings, and they do have more opposition with Western. I hesitate to use the word, but kind of capitalistic, because obviously that's a false dialectic as well. And I really like that this book does kind of illustrate that, because I know you have to go soon, but
Oh, yeah, right.
I know they do illustrate. I like that they illustrate that, because that's something. So when you look at, like, Keynesian versus, there's
Yeah.
like Adam Smith versus Karl Marx, and then you look at, like, Keynesian versus von Hayek, and really, like, you go back before them, they were all predicated on Mandeville, who was an open Luciferian. When you look at Adam Smith, right, it was very much a Luciferian concept. It's this idea of virtue through sin, right? We should have greed is going to be good, and
Yeah,
greed
yeah,
will
yeah. I've
advance the
seen that in
economy.
a lot
Um,
of
and that's not to say there's no good components
no,
to
but
it.
he also points out that state capitalism is what the goal is here. Socialism doesn't mean anything at all. It's just state capitalism. Who's going
It's
to produce? That's the question. And you can have monopolies. So it's basically like fascism is like monopolies in business with the government, and socialism is just, the
Yeah,
government is
but
the
they
monopoly.
create these warring factions, right? I
Yeah.
mean, but really they're two sides of the same coin, ultimately creating a dialectic to result in negation, which ends in the same result. They want to get to the same place. Like von Hayek's last chapter in his Road to Serfdom was all about why we need a one world government. And Austrian economics, most of this free market stuff, and this book does illustrate some of that too. Most of this free market stuff was actually a narrative created to deindustrialize the United States.
Are you referring now? I do have to go, but
Yeah.
are you referring? That sounds like something in the Coleman book. And
Coleman talks about that a lot,
let's
but
leave that and have a part two. Go ahead, say what you're gonna say.
okay, yeah, we'll have part 2, but they, allude to a lot of that in the Milner-Fabian conspiracy, because they talk about um, like, in terms of the capitalists, versus the socialists, and
Yeah,
how really it's 2 narratives, competing narratives, but that were designed to create the same end goal, and
yeah,
they
I
fund both
definitely
sides of them.
Yeah, I definitely like get bummed out by that. So that's another thing, another another pillar of my own ideology under fire. So let's save that one for
Okay.
part 2. Do we have a
Yeah.
deal? All right,
Yes.
that's great. I'm gonna play your Rebels for Cause video
Thank
again,
you.
and don't hang up because
I will.
I need to talk to you after. So okay, Courtney
Okay.
Turner, so much, and
Thank
great
you.
luck on your event. I can't
Thank
wait. And
you.
where should people find you before I hit play? Because we're not coming back.
Where should what?
Where should
Oh,
people find you to listen to what you do? And
CourtneyTurner.com. Courtenay, Courtenay, TURNER.com. And yeah, Rebels for Cause spelled out for, it's not the number 4. So, and no A.
yes, okay. So that's great, everybody. That's June 3rd in Tennessee. Check it out. And until next time, thank you so much. You have been listening to Deep Dives with Monica Perez.
Thank